when we got into the tournament, that's what we've done all along. That's what we're going to continue to do. Parsons, once we got to the medal rounds, I think as a staff, we just felt that it had kind of been Tyler's team at that point. And that's not taken away from maybe the staff except for Brownie. He wanted Wall to play every game. But, Tyler just kind of, it felt like it was his moment. And I think that was our decision, and you go into that championship game and Tyler had, Joe had played well against Canada and on New Year's Eve, and you're playing Canada for a championship. So I think that was the first time that there was, potentially even a decision to be made. But Coach Motzko was pretty ready to ride with Tyler.
I think some coaches might. We switched them, obviously, every game. The controversy for us came the Canada game and the regulation. It was the New Year's Eve game. We had beat Canada in the summer. Joel played that game. We beat him. Parson played that game, and it was score 5-1. And I believe in karma and things like that. And then when it got to that game, we knew we were in the medal round and moving on. We went with Joe, and this is where we might have caused some controversy, because I wanted to save Parson for the medal round if we had to play. I didn't want anything to go wrong that game because it really didn't matter. And that New Year's Eve game turns into a spectacle and that's we ran into a little problem with that game. We beat Canada in the New Year's Eve game. Joel Wall was outstanding, but when the game was over, there's a big party atmosphere. The parents they rented a room across another hotel, and they texted, "We want the players to come over and celebrate New Year's Eve," and we put a kibosh on that immediately because they could put parents. They were New Year's Eve. We just beat Canada, like we had accomplished something, and we took a quick step back where our kids took their foot off the pedal, and we played Switzerland in the next game. And we just couldn't. We had nothing in the tank that game. We lucked that game through, and that's part of adversity. Every team's going to hit it at some point in this tournament, and you can be playing. All the U.S. teams are going to be good hockey teams from this point on, but to move forward to medal, it comes down to a moment, a game, a penalty kill that you've got to climb over. And the year before, that team was in 16 or 17 or 15. That team was playing outstanding. And it was the Russia game. And one last thing I'll add, too, is when we played Russia in the semifinal game to move on, U.S. had never beat Russia in the medal round. And we took that on as a personal some team had to end that streak, and that's what we threw on our guys, that it's over. That if any team is going to end it and take Russia on, we're going how many years of history of this tournament and many losses. And our guys took that as a fight, as a personal battle that night. And I thought that was a good move that we had made.
Well, going into it, I think we all thought running the 2-3 might be a good option because it's kind of a college hockey power play, and that didn't go very long. That might have went a day or two. But we kind of stuck with our guys. We had some guys that maybe we moved a little bit. We moved Cunnin and Thompson a little bit. But I think it's challenging if you start moving your guys. And the one thing, Brownie talked about it. Our top group had, Keller and McAvoy and Greenway and White and all this talent. And, the second group was the one scoring all the goals. So, and they kind of, the top guys, they wanted to score, but they just kind of were, all in different pages. And we would have a power play meeting before every game. And I'm talking to Brownie on the way in, and, Brownie, what do you think? And, what about this and what about that? And he said something to me that that was great, and I actually said it to the guys. He said, just grab those 5 guys and tell them to get a plan to bring it to you. You guys go sit together. You guys organize what you want to do. Come back and tell us, and then we'll coach that plan through. And not so much the fact that they got to give you a plan, but you're putting it back on them. Like, all right, guys, this is a players' tournament. You're on the power play. You're expected to score, so you guys get together. And from that moment on, that unit was outstanding. So we kind of rolled a couple D through the second group, but for the most part, it was the same guys with the same sticks. Maybe move a guy here or there, but we kind of went with our guys.
We've got time for probably one more question. Teddy?
We did have some guys who just don't penalty kill, but fortunately and the way Bob picked the team, we did have enough guys that was their role on their college teams as well, our junior team. The hard part is you don't have any time to practice it. So we're basically trying to figure it out in between periods, or maybe just in a meeting, on a board instead of doing stuff on the ice. What the kids wanted to do, I kind of asked them what they do, and what they wanted to do was like a power I, but we weren't very good at it. So we ended up going more to a box, and you're trying to figure out, each power play, what's working, or for the other team, what's working, and what can we do against it. So even though they were excited to do one thing, we just didn't have the timing or the practice to get all on the same page that way. So you had to keep it really simple. And as far as getting the guys to buy in, Bob did that from the beginning. I think one thing I'll just say, you have a lot of big egos, and everyone says you got to be on the same team page. The thing I thought he did so well was you also always have those guys that aren't big ego guys. They don't come through the door with their shoulders back. And he talked to them before the tournament. He said, don't be just tiptoe around. We're only here for a short time. You guys have to jump in as much as the guys, you guys who know Bracco or McAvoy, like they come through the door ready to go. They feel like they belong. You had some other guys that weren't national team guys. They didn't know their teammates, whereas 3/4 of the team were very familiar with each other. And Bob, really coached those guys to come in and be a part of it. And I thought having that, what you'd say the shy guys, jump in and really put their best foot forward was huge as far as being a full team and ready to go.
One other thing we did, just for an idea, we were big on after the camp we met in Omaha at the USHL. We came in a day early and met. But I had all the guys do prep work on, if you run face-off plays, I want you to get some video clips of that face-off play. Or we use the LA Kings on breakout. They're outstanding with breakouts. We have a whole 15-minute teaching clip on the LA Kings and how they break out. Penalty kill. And I had everybody send clips on situations, and using the NHL and a lot of it to Chappie. And when we got there, thinking, when you run out of time, there were times that our guys would fire that one clip up on a penalty kill, and they're actually in the room during a game showing the guys an LA King penalty kill on pressing down or how far we wanted to go. And in a tournament like this, and something I'm going to incorporate, because I think the guys like looking at that versus showing them the mistakes they're making, but showing maybe pro hockey clips. And so those are things that we put together all summer. We had piles of clips that on all situations. I'm going to incorporate that St. Cloud, and it seemed to work. And I'm sure a lot of you guys and gals do that already, but it was pretty handy for us.
Well, guys, that wraps things up for us here. Let's give these guys a round of applause here. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate that. The next meeting we have here is the NCAA Tournament Committee. We'll bring that group up here now with Brian Riley. Yeah. All right, we're going to try to get going here to get back on track. Hey, Vonner, could you just yell out there to anybody?
Let's do this. I think we'll put it back on the ground. I feel like that. No, I feel like I'd rather.
It is, indeed.
Bright light, big city. No, remember the mics are always on.
All right, we'll get started. But before we get started, so all the coaches here know we have created some time here to get back to our D1 issues. So they're serving lunch at 11:30. Once you guys grab your lunch, come on back in here at about 11:45. Bring your lunch in here, and we'll just kind of bang out some of those things that we didn't get to yesterday. This is the NCAA tournament meeting right here, championship meeting. We have Tom McGinnis, who you heard from the other day, who was the chair of our committee, Steve Metcalf from the University of New Hampshire, Kristen Fossbender from the NCAA, and Chad Tolliver from the NCAA. I as well serve on the committee. Like I said, we have Mel Pearson, who was on the committee with the WCHA, but he has since moved on. Jim McLaughlin from Union College, athletic director, and Brian Faison from athletic director from North Dakota. And there will be some changes this summer.
Good morning. Again, appreciate your time today. What we'd like to do to spend our time this morning is basically getting feedback from you all on the topics we presented. As you know, certainly just reviewing quickly, you guys had a chance to talk about these items at your conference meetings. Yesterday we spent a little time just basically giving kind of an update on what we had heard back from those coaches' meetings. So now just hoping to engage in some good conversation about ideas, feedback. Obviously, our goal as a committee and with the NCAA is to improve our championship, not only the Frozen Four, but the regionals as well. So we're always looking for certainly our best customers are our coaches and our student athletes, and keeping your experience forefront. We want to know what you guys feel are priorities for us as we engage. We'll be meeting the first week in June in Indianapolis to really do a thorough review of the championship, as well as begin planning for next year in St. Paul, and then obviously the next 4 years, which were recently announced. So we'll hit on a couple of these, or on the topics from the agenda. There are some copies of this agenda in the back if you don't have it, but it has not changed from what was shared with you during your conference tournaments. I'm actually going to go in reverse order a little bit here, just because I think some of the ones towards the bottom aren't going to take a ton of time. But again, just RPI. Again, 2013, we made a couple changes to the RPI, eliminated the teams under consideration factor, and then added in the quality wins bonus, as well as weighing, giving an extra weight for wins on the road versus wins at home, and losses on the road and losses at home. So any thoughts, any concerns of needing to look at any parts of that? We do take a quick, brief look at it with Tim every summer, but we feel over the last couple of years it's provided us a great opportunity. We have the best selection process in all of NCAA sports. Our call lasts 35 minutes as opposed to some that take multiple days. There's not a lot of surprises in who's making the tournament, but I think that's something that we value as part of our championship. So just curious from that perspective, any thoughts, concerns, ideas anyone has on the current calculation of how the RPI is done? So everyone loves it. There's no concerns. The only thing we've ever talked about is, as we say that we're the envy of every other team or every other sport, sometimes the idea of subjectivity comes up. I think there's a consensus that there's not a real desire to inject any subjectivity in determining who the 16 teams are, but possibly there could be some value down the road looking at, is there value in looking at subjectivity? And once you've said who your 16 are, instead of relying completely on the numbers, giving us some flexibility to move some folks around within the seeds. As you start looking at head-to-head competitions, you may be ahead of somebody else that beat you twice. Any concern, interest, idea, value in looking at any subjectivity once the 16 teams are determined to determine the seeds. Case? Okay. Yep.
Can you talk about what this committee has done regarding the weights for on the road, at home, wins, losses, and whether there is consideration to move that further to these 2 points here?
Certainly. As you know, we're certainly not in a position to be able to tell anybody how many home games and road games they're going to play from your non-conference schedule. Currently, what we did introduce in 2013 was a weighting. So I'm not Tim, so I'm not going to have that level of detail. But basically, it's a factor. If you win a home game, or win a road game, it's a factor of 1.2, and if you get a home win, it's a factor of 0.8. So there is a difference. There is a higher weighting in the RPI right now for winning a road game versus winning a home game. On the flip side, if you lose a home game, it's more detrimental to you than if you lose a road game. So that was introduced, and that is a factor that we can change. So right now it's at 1.2 and 0.8. So what we can look at is, okay, if we change that to 1.5 and 0.5, what does that look like? Tim has provided us the tools to go and say, all right, we can take this year's results, change those factors, and see what changes. Does it change who the 16 teams are in the tournament? Does it change, how does that change the seeding? So we certainly can have an opportunity to look at that and determine, is that something that changes it enough? You could look at it and say, because I tried to play around with some of the factors before he came here, and there wasn't a lot of significant change in who the 16 teams were. I think in one scenario, Ohio State, I was working with quality wins bonus, a bunch of stuff. I think Ohio State bumped out and BC went in one scenario. But it's certainly something we can look at and see if there's, whether that's the right factor to change to compensate for that, or is there something else along the lines of how the true RPI, the percentage of wins and your opponent's wins and losses. So we can take a look at that for sure.
Tom, is that for all games or just non-conference?
That is all games. But yes, we can certainly take a look at that and see what some of the factors would be that could change it, or how much it could be weighed, and whether that's really an impact or not. Yes, sir. Great point. And you beat them and you don't get the vote. Yeah, it's a great point.
To that point, Tom, couldn't you do two? Couldn't you have, like 1 point, say change it to 1.4 and 0.6 for the non-league and keep it what it's at for the conference games?
I will ask the question. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, Tim's can work some magic, so we'd have to wait and see. But
Everybody plays their league games.
true.
That's not going to change. It's not going to be weighted. It's the non-conference games that are the problem.
The problem with that would be that not all the leagues play the same number of non-conference games. So if you weighted non-conference games a different number than a conference game, conferences are going to start adjusting their schedule as well to that.
Yep.
What is basketball? Basketball has the same problem. Are they trying to fix it with the RPI?
Well, I believe they're the first one that started weighing home, because again, same question was brought up, and that was started being weighed. I think they're also looking to the problem. I mean, I think theirs is, and again, I don't spend a ton of time working with basketball, but I know theirs certainly got the issue of all your mid-majors. They spend all of December on the road playing games, and they're bye games, and again, I think it's a much larger issue because it's such a large percentage of their games, and they're playing basically all of November and December on the road, playing a bunch of Power 5 schools. So I do know it's an issue. I know it's something that's been brought up and something they're looking at. I don't know what their solution is or what ideas that they're looking at, but we could ask that question.
I want to jump back in real quick to Tom's point on just the RPI, and not that I'm advocating for the subjectivity piece, but talking a little bit more. I think we've heard some interest, not even interest, but some comments about using the current system to get the 16, but then maybe some discussion about where they fall within the 16. Just from a standpoint of, as you guys know, the percentages or the amount of the points between the different teams is 1/100th at time and those kinds of things. And for us, I think when we're looking at really the divider lines, as we call them, the breakers of 4 and 5 and 8 and 9, and those places that make you, whether you're a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4, there's no discussion right now at all about whether or not you're a 4 or a 5. No discussion about, the 4 may have lost 3 times to the 5 below them, but because that's what the system says, that's how we do this. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't change it. I just am bringing it up as a point. That's a discussion piece that in the other sports that Chad and I work with, that is a huge point of discussion a lot of times, is are they, head-to-head competition, what they did on the field or court or ice. So I'm throwing that out there as something that I've heard over the last couple of days while we're down here. Crickets. Nobody has a thought on it.
Wisconsin. Yep. And that's a great example. I mean, I think we ended up 1/100th of a point ahead of Lowell. And had we played Lowell that year and Lowell beat us twice, would it be appropriate for us to be a 1 seed and Lowell to be a 2 seed? Should it have been flip-flop then? Or is it, nope, just follow the numbers? So, again, just gauging whether there's any interest to enter into anybody, allow the committee to have conversations about whether those should be factors in determining the seeds. Without a doubt, yes. We would have to identify what that is, because the greater part about our tournament is we don't get one phone call after the field select in the tournament. Everyone's like, oh, yep, we knew that's who was going to be in. We know those what the seeds are going to be. And occasionally someone gets moved around a little bit just for a couple reasons. But there's really no phone calls complaining my team should have been in, or I should have been this. So I agree. We would have to identify what those criteria are and what we would look at as considerations, whether it's head-to-head and some other factors.
And Don, to that point, the other sports have that already in place. So, I mean, we'd have a place to look. Again, not saying I'm advocating for it, just it's something that comes up, I think, over the years, and that we here in the office, as you're mentioning, does anybody else use it? no. And there are times that it's like, why, when we're picking a 64 team volleyball bracket, do we not use something like that? But I think because of these other things, the definite discussions about head to head and those kinds of things. So they do set up, here's our, primary criteria for selections. Here's our secondary. So we would set some, you would know what it is.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Yep, go ahead, Bob.
One question on that is, you know, if you're flipping 7 or 8 or 8 or 9 might be one thing, but if 16 is 1/10 of a point over 17, but 17 beat them twice, how you gonna flip them? That's when, in the old days when that stuff happened, that's when a lot of the hard feelings came up.
Which I think is why the start and what I've heard is using what you currently have as a system to establish who those 16 are. So you wouldn't have the discussion, whether it's 100th of a point or not, between 16 and 17. But keeping that so that everybody, to some degree, you're still in the scenario where everybody knows who the 16 are. It's just more a matter of, are they in the right place within that 16? And maybe they are, and that's fine too. Just something to throw out there in the discussions on it.
Yep. Great. Thank you, everyone. Again, working backward on our agenda, overtime formats, I think we've heard pretty consistently that what you would like to see from the championship committee is RPI stops after 5-on-5. So whenever any change is made by the rules committee regarding overtime, the RPI will basically end after, whether it's 60, 65 minutes, whenever 5-on-5 stops playing, that's when the RPI will be used to calculate, or the results will be used to calculate the RPI. So,
Is that, I mean, are we hearing you all correctly?
Tournament formats. So, again, currently, as we mentioned the other day, we've got our regional format set up, predetermined sites. We are currently give strong preference and almost all the time are going to predetermined non-campus sites or non-sites where teams have are playing their home games. We have run into some problems over the last couple years. Certainly when we released the results this year, and you can see where the regionals ended up, we're not getting a lot of bids. So what we're seeing is we do have a couple campus sites that bid, and the committee's overwhelming vote right now is to not go to those sites. But we're getting to the point where people just aren't bidding, and certainly, as we've mentioned, we've got 4 or 5 sites that we're kind of rotating through kind of in the eastern part of the country. I think there's some positives and negatives to those sites, and certainly we just don't have options, and you start looking at other parts of the country. Allentown, I think, is going to do a great job for us in 18 and 19 as a new site and a new facility, and certainly the staff in North Dakota has done a good job, but they're a host every year, so we know where North Dakota is going to get placed in the tournament every year because they're hosting every year. So I think we need to look at options where we have look at an opportunity to provide us with more options, and look at a couple different scenarios. I think we provided you with 3 on a sheet. I think the feedback we got is doing non-predetermined sites where just highest 4 seeds host is not something that would work for us, and that's kind of the message we heard, so we just want to confirm that. Obviously, there's a lot of sites in college hockey that can't host 4 teams, just from a facility perspective, locker rooms, etc. So one of the options we would like to look at is entertaining campus sites as part of the predetermined format. So we would still identify in advance where the tournament would go in advance, but opening back up to campus sites. And we may have to put some criteria or preferences within those campus sites. But I guess just want to get some of your feedback on, again, our intent is to, from this is just simply having more options to pick from, so we're not going back to the same sites. I mean, before we even get to enhancing the tournament and making it better and creating better atmosphere in our sites, we simply just need locations to go to, or we're going to end up back in the same spots every year. So I guess just looking for feedback on that opportunity to look at going to campus sites, still predetermined, but opening it up to campus sites and reviewing those as viable options as well.
And Don, if that's the reason, I'm not hearing it. So, I mean, I'm not getting the questions and hey, we would like to bid, but financially we can't handle it. So that's because I think if that was the message we were getting, we definitely would be having conversations about how to fix it on that end. we're just not seeing the number of bids. And I think that's the hard part for us is we, in the years, have left down here and we've got ideas of good buildings that might be able to do it. And then they don't bid. And so we are in a situation where we had 5 bids, I think is what we had for the East, and we had 3 bids for the West. And one of the 3 bids in the West was a campus site. And so immediately as these guys are making, there weren't many decisions to make in the West because we only had 2 sites that were, or I should say 3 sites for each year. So you had, but each year of that 2-year cycle, one was a campus site. So you had the 2 sites we're at in Allentown and Sioux Falls for next year, and in Fargo and Allentown for 19. So that's the biggest struggle, I think, from my perspective, is I think there's this idea that we get all these bids and we don't.
And
That could be. Yep. That could be. Yeah. That could be.
Kristen, can you also speak to what the Championship Oversight Committee has said recently regarding neutral versus campus sites and how we play in with other sports across the association?
Sure. So from that standpoint, and I think we have this discussion each year, just so you guys know, this group reports to the Championship Oversight Committee. So that is a body of administrators within Division I that then approve or deny the different recommendations that this group makes. There is a football oversight committee, so the football reports to that, and then there's a women's basketball and a men's basketball oversight committee, and outside of that, the other Division I sports report to the Championship Oversight Committee that Josh is referencing. And over the years, they've talked about, ways to continue to make our championships better. Also, from a financial standpoint, looking at about being financially sound. A lot of our sports have non-predetermined regional sites or first and second round sites or whatever that may be. I will say we've been able, for lack of a better term, to hold them off on hockey because they understand the logistical problems of going to, let's say, the top 4 seeds hosting on campus. Our boss, Joni Comstock, and I have had lots of conversations about it because with not having enough facilities that potentially have 4 locker rooms right off the bat, that right there is not a great experience for our student athletes. So I think from that standpoint, I don't think we're in a situation quite yet, Josh, where they're going to come to us and say, you have to do it. I think a year or 2 ago, we felt like we might be more in that scenario. But with that being said, I think we're continuing to try and do what we can to enhance the championship. And you guys have heard me say this before, I work with Division I volleyball, and we went to non-predetermined sites this year for regionals, and it was outstanding for us. Now, it's a lot easier to put 4 volleyball teams in a facility than it is 4 hockey teams, but our regional attendance went from 15,000 to 30,000. All the games are on ESPN. I mean, it was great for that sport. So there are instances where it works. I think there are 4 sports right now that don't have non-predetermined: hockey, wrestling, hockey, women's gymnastics, men's lacrosse, and then, of course, men's and women's basketball, and that's on the team side of it. So I don't feel like we're in a position where we're going to get pressured to change it, but I think we also always want to kind of be in the forefront of looking ahead on it so that we don't get eventually told, hey, you've got to do it, and now we're behind the 8 ball to figure out what to make it, how to do that. But I do think they really understand the logistical problems that we would face in trying to do 4 on campus.
Is there anything from them regarding campus in a predetermined format that they're pushed for?
No, they wouldn't. I mean, that I think would be whatever we recommend to them. I mean, that would be one of those things, in all honesty, Josh, it wouldn't even necessarily be something they would have to approve. It would probably be more of an informational item from this group that we're going to open up in the bid process the ability to look at home sites as a predetermined option.
Because it's not a rule that we can't,
It's
and we
just a
have. And we
preference.
went to South Bend a couple years ago because, again, it was the only option. There literally was no other option that year. So it's not that we can't go to campus sites. We've tried to collect the feedback of this group and tried to honor their request, and now we're just getting to a point because, again, in previous years we've gotten to the point where, we'll have, we're unanimous we want to be in neutral sites, but then, it's a conference that says we want to be in neutral sites, but then none of that conference bids. Or members of that conference actually bid their campus sites. So it gets confusing as to kind of really what the sense is. So I think we're just to a point now where in order to have viable options for our championship to be able to not go to the same places all the time, we need to open it up to campuses and make sure people are aware of that before we go through a bid. Because I think now people's mindset is they're not going to go to campus. That's why I don't bid. I'm not going to put the time and effort into it. We need to make sure that's an option. And if there is feedback from your member institutions, I mean, keep in mind, a member institution needs to sponsor any bid. If your feedback is it's not viable because of whatever the reason is, we want that information, whether it's something in the bid specs from a facility perspective, whether it's the financial terms, whatever it is, If there's things in there preventing us from getting more bids from the bid specs, that's what we want to know. If it's simply right now just we know we can be on campus, so we're not putting anything in, so that's why. Yes, sir. Letting them add games? Like to add, like instead of 34, play 36? Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that's something that we would go, a path we would go down.
I mean, I think you're right, Don. That happens, definitely. I think the East, we have 5 or 6 bids every year that we're able to, and it has been, we've traditionally moved amongst those 5 or 6 sites every couple of years. So where you're in a situation that, you know, and I'll use Steve. Steve, they've bid in Manchester, and if UNH gets in, they're going to Manchester. It seems to be more prevalent in the West because, you know, we have more campus sites that would be where folks would bid, and we aren't on those campus sites. So in North Dakota, if Brian was here, he would, you know, they've bid it couple different places, and if they're bidding it that way because then they know they'll be home, we can't stop that right now. And not that I'm saying we would want to stop that, but I had a couple conversations with coaches yesterday, even in the discussion of going to a predetermined home site. You know, would there be some kind of caveat put in that you couldn't go to a site 2 years in a row? And my first answer was, I'm not putting caveats on anything until we get 6, 7 bids or something like that we really have things to pick from. But that could always be something that we talk about. I mean, the guys will tell you in the East, we haven't been to Manchester usually back to back. It's usually, you know, I think next year we're Bridgeport, Worcester, and then the year after that we're Providence, Manchester, and Albany gets thrown in there at times. So, but it's something we could look at. Right now, we just don't even know. I don't know if we open it back up how many. I'm assuming we'd get a bunch of predetermined, you know, home sites that would be interested. I could be wrong, but yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well, I think a couple factors in that. One, good, bad, or indifferent. In the last 6 years, 70% of the teams that advance to the Frozen Four bust to their regional. So, I mean, there's certainly an advantage there to when you can play in a location that's closer to home. Not necessarily, and obviously we're not playing on campus, but 70% of the teams advancing the Frozen Four bust to their regional site. Part of it is, and it's not a foolproof system. I mean, you know, if we go to a campus site and that institution or an institution near that site doesn't get in, yeah, are we going to have attendance challenges? Sure, which are some of the same challenges we have now. But I think, you know, a lot of us push to invest in some of these campus facilities. A lot of facilities have been built in the last few years. I think it's also a reward to the fans to sit there and say, you guys have invested in our hockey program, you guys have invested in our facilities, or our state has, or our city has, or our university has. We want to bring the most premier events in our sport to these venues that we've invested so much time in. All due respect, there are some very nice minor league facilities that we're playing in, but we've spent a lot of time and effort in making our venues nice. Why shouldn't we be playing the biggest games of the year in our venues?
The other piece I would say is it's not just a West issue. There are buildings in the East that could definitely host on their campuses as well. So I think that if this isn't, we're us saying if we opened it up, we're only looking at West, it would be anybody. So any of those Eastern schools that wanted to bid on campus could do that as well. I just think that we've seen the troubles in the West, for lack of a better term. Jim? And Jim, you're talking about a 1 to 8, like let the top 8 host on campus. Is that what you're talking about? And so just to bring that out, because it's not one of the formats we actually put out there, there's lots of discussion right now from our perspective on looking at whether we can do that from a timing perspective right now. Some of it goes into the television's discussions that we constantly are having on regards to the ESPN contract. just some feedback for you all. And when we go through those things, the committee can talk about format, talk about things that are right. We work in conjunction then, conversations with ESPN on changing formats. Because all of a sudden us saying we're going to go from 5 sites that they're televising to 13 sites, if we were doing that, if you went 8 and then you did a next weekend of 4, and then another weekend, now you're 13 sites, that's a huge financial for them, potential financial for us, things that we're looking at right now. But from a timing perspective, the 1 to 8 right now isn't one that we can fully vet at this point in time. I think maybe part of the reason we only went out 2 years on regional bids was to be able to continue to have these discussions and figure out what we can or can't do. But the 1 to 8 at this point in time is probably one not currently on the table. Hopefully down the road we might be able to have more discussion about it, but at this point in time we're trying to figure out what we can do to fix or enhance what we're currently doing based on what the feedback is from you all, and what are those pieces, what can we do. Rico.
Only Olympic sheets we play on.
We're both on Olympic sheets, so we're going to get one more member.
That's it. That's why I asked the question, right? I think those would definitely be conversations and things that we've already had some brief conversation about, knowing that has been the preference of, has been neutral facilities with NHL size sheets. What is the capacity of the buildings? But at the same point, I don't think we want to necessarily not allow somebody to host if there's a reason why, but we can talk through that. I mean, the committee, the bid specs could say campus sites, you need to have NHL sheets, or who knows what that looks like for sure. In, I say, the olden days, I think we went to campus sites that didn't have Olympic sheets. I think the last time we were there, 2008 in CC at World Arena, was a regional. There was probably one of the last times we were actually on a predetermined campus site. Might have been 8. And so Mariucci was maybe 8 or 9. I can't remember. They all start to run together. So it's a discussion. It would have to be part of the bid specs that we would add out there. So folks know, I think the biggest issue is everybody would know going into it, here's what you can bid on. Here's what the committee is going to do. They're going to look at all of these different sites. And it's not necessarily just going to be because you have a neutral facility, that's where you're going to go. Let's look and see what's best for the sport as a whole.
Casey Jim.
I just think our voting, EC, East, Atlantic, WCHA, they were unanimous for the current format at non-campus sites. And Rico's group said they wanted to have it. I don't think Big Ten really voted. But it was straightforward. They wanted non-campus sites. It was voted on. They like number 1 by a margin. I think some of the discussion we had was what are the important points about it? You guys keep talking student athlete experience, but TV takes precedent. We don't care about TV anymore. One league said yes, they do. The majority of our guys here don't care about TV taking the stage. They want game time. So they would prefer to be a better fan experience and try to get people in by the times of the games. So we don't think we've explored all those options. So I think we just want to talk maybe about what our priorities for our event to try to make it the student athlete experience. That's the discussion we're having.
Go ahead, Bob. And then Casey will talk. Yeah.
Other opinion on the West, we have been talking, but the West is
Certainly, and again, Casey mentioned all the conferences. I mean, I agree that all those conferences have continued to voice their support, but then I'll say that I can tell you at least one of those conferences that never submits a bid. So it's kind of like, put your money where your mouth is to some degree and say, if you want to have neutral sites, then put forth a bid for a neutral site. And if there's a challenge for that, why you can't right now, explain to us what that challenge is, and we can talk about what that is.
And I mean, you guys have been here enough. You guys are sick of me talking about regional format, I'm sure, over the years. And it's the same discussion. And while I understand that we've got conferences that say they prefer the first format, I get that, Casey. But we are in a situation now where we are not getting the bids. And it's going to either come to the fact of we are in a scenario that we did a couple years ago where Notre Dame hosted because it was the only bid we had. And that, everybody was up in arms about that. I would rather have the discussion now and have you all know going in, it's definitely going to be an option. And while I understand and we respect the decisions and the input from those conferences, sometimes this group has to make decisions that is what we think is best for the sport. And if going forward right now it's going back to looking at campus sites, doesn't mean we couldn't go to a neutral site. If there was a neutral building, like you said, Bob, Sioux Falls, we haven't been there. You said it's amazing. I'm looking forward to it. If it's great and they keep bidding, doesn't mean we wouldn't go there. I think that I'm not saying neutral sites are out of the mix, but a institution now is going to have to make a decision potentially on, am I going to bid it on a campus site or am I going to bid it on a neutral site? And I think we have to continue to look at that, or we're going to be stuck. We're going to be sitting here again in 2 years saying we got 3 bids again. We're in the same site. While I think Allentown's going to be great, I'm not going to lie, part of us we're going there 2 years in a row and we've never been there. And I think they'll do a great job, but I'm like, there's a little bit of me that's, and that's because the other one was a campus site. So I want us to continue to keep looking at what we can do to move that forward. You brought up the television piece, and I know that you guys, television isn't necessarily the top priority for you all, and I understand that. You have to understand the world we live in with it, and it is a contract through 23-24 with ESPN for television. This is one of the premier sports for them that they put on from the NCAA sports that they have. We work with them closely on the different options that we can. As you guys know, over the years, we've worked on the game times, the time between games. I think we've had years where it was 19, and now I think the least we had this year was 23 and a half between game times. So we've worked with them on those. 2:30 in the afternoon on Friday may not be ideal, but we try and put it in a place where we think it's going to get as many fans as it can. And this year, that game had a pretty good crowd. I understand it's not ideal. We work with them on format. As I said, it's a partnership, game times, and who plays. There was something that came up, I think, maybe yesterday, or I've heard around here, that the number 1 seed should always play the early game. Not disagreeing, but ESPN has the rights to be able to say to us the game order that they want. They'll come back to us and say, this is why we want this game. We'll push back sometimes on those, depending on what and for what reasons we may do that. And we've had years where our pushback was enough that they made a flip on it. But those are the I don't want to say challenges, but that's what we live in as far as the TV piece. And right now it's not going away. And our idea of 5 and 8 and everything being streamed and those kinds of things, while it all sounds nice, there's some definite things we still have to work with on the ESPN side. We all saw what happened 2 days ago at ESPN. I mean, they cut 100 jobs. So we're continuing. We want to keep working with them on the partnership. 23-24 is the last year of that contract. So just an FYI kind of on the television. We hear you. We understand. We continue to do what we can. But there are some places that we don't have that ability to make changes. Hold on, Guy, and then Josh. It's somewhat timing on that. Yeah, it's a little bit of both as far as Guy on the standpoint of us looking at it from our financial side on the NCAA side of it. How much more is it going to cost us potentially to send, multiple weekends, multiple buildings, as well as talking potentially with an ESPN and what that does to them and saying now you have to televise, because per their contract they carry all the games of the tournament. So if all of a sudden we're saying now you've got to televise and go to 13 sites versus 5, that could be an issue. It's not we can't turn to them and say we're going to change this without any conversation with them from a tournament format standpoint. It has to be a kind of a partnership piece on it because of the contract and what they're required to do per contract. They're required per contract to show all 13 games on a linear network. And while yours was streamed, it was then re-aired on ESPNU within like 10 hours of it. So they still are sending people to those sites. So it's not like they're just doing a stream from someplace else. They're still sending crews to all 4 sites, and that would be the understanding that they would still want to do if we went to a 1 to 8. I just think from a timing perspective of the timing of the contracts, timing of our selections and our financial pieces, we're still trying to work through that. That's why.
Yeah, it's 2 things. It's the NCAA finances and the ESPN finances, because it's no secret I'm an advocate for that format, and we're going to continue to have that conversation. It's just a matter of taking the time to make sure how it would work financially and see if it's a viable option to present to all of you.
I think, like I said to you guys yesterday, Bob, that we've been talking, what are the ways to enhance the current format if that's what we're looking at? And if one of those ways to enhance the current format would be adding a day off in between. I know last year I sit down here and I think it was harder for me to say. I think maybe it's something we can take back to our group more so now to say, hey, we know we can't potentially look at a 1 to 8 maybe right now, so maybe this is a better way to do it. So I made a note about it. We can talk about it in June and go to our leadership if we feel like as a group that that's the right way to go. Right. Steve. I mean, we continue to talk about it. I mean, the ESPN3, I can't remember, we had 3 games, I think, that were on ESPN3. We had 1 that was on 2 in the regional rounds. We did have games that you guys knew were bouncing around based on finishing times of the others, which has been a discussion that's come up on just, are the windows even long enough that we're starting with? And we heard that at the final site, especially for our coaches, was, we say the game's going to be 5 and 8:30 or whatever, and that's not realistic. So is that a conversation we'll have with ESPN about saying, should those windows be 5 and 9 or whatever that looks like? So, but to your point, I think they are required to put them on a linear network. We had 3 on ESPN3. The ESPN2 game, we had quite a conversation with them because, as you guys may or may not, I mean, some of you were watching it, it jumped for the second overtime from ESPN2 to ESPNU. And you can ask Steve, because Steve and I were sitting there at dinner because it was the night before, and I was not a very happy camper at all. Because all of a sudden what we've always been told is where you start, you will finish, and we'll start the game after you on something else and move it. And in this scenario, that didn't happen. So we had some conversations very quickly with them about that because we knew we're losing viewers. And then I will tell you, how many games do we have? 13, 14 games? Our ratings were up in all but 3 windows, and up by a lot in all 3 of the 3 windows. We just got those ratings numbers. We were down in the second national semifinal and down in the final a little bit, but we were up across almost all of our regional sites, which is good for us. We did ask about the ESPN2 game because it moved. What are the ratings timing? So just, again, I understand. Trust us, we understand what you guys are saying about the TV side. We continue to do our best to work through it where we can. Bobby.
Yep. Bob, yeah, we agree with you. I mean, there's just some things we need to work out from two cost points, an NCAA cost point and then a TV cost point. I agree with you completely. Yeah, that's something we need to continue to hope to try and explore. It's just not something on the table today until we can complete that analysis. I know we're getting a little bit of a hook here. I'm getting an evil eye from Coach Riley here. So just wanted to make sure, again, really appreciate the conversation this morning. I know we didn't hit on the other tournament topics, but realize that, some of the stuff that Bob mentioned, the times, the day in between, the TV timeouts, the video replay, the talent at some of the provided by ESPN for some of the games. Won't call out individuals' names right here. We all know those are other items that we want to make sure we're discussing this summer, particularly some of those topics need to be brought up with ESPN again. We will continue to do so. If there are other topics beyond those that you guys have, feel free to reach out to us, reach out to your conference commissioner. We'll get those so we can make sure they're the part of the conversation. Certainly part of the time we spend during our committee meeting in June is with ESPN to provide them some feedback. So if there are other items or any other issues that you can think of, again, how can we continue to enhance the current format? We'll spend some time this summer looking at what some options may look like for campus sites under the current predetermined format so we can make sure we're sharing that with everyone. Again, we've already set 18-19, so this isn't something we have to worry about immediately, but something obviously we want to plan for so we're not caught in a bad timing spot a couple years from now. So, again, thank you very much for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, again, we're going to get the NCAA Rules Committee, but for the coaches that came in, we have created time for D1 issues, 11:45. So at 11:30, grab your lunch, come on back in here, and we'll get back into the D1 issues, NLI, and those things.
Guys, we can take some seats, please. We want to move into the rules discussion. Yeah. Yep. Any members of the Rules Committee in the room, please come up. We're running late, guys, so I'll ask you to take a seat, please. So everyone was sent material by the NCAA on the Ice Hockey Rules Committee, and we've split the committee up here. We've got a men's meeting and a women's meeting. It's a non-rules year, so the amount of time that's devoted to this topic depends on whether we have immediate rules to be voting in or whether we're in the situation we're in now. So I'm up here as I've been on the committee. I'm also the interim chair of the committee in Tom Anastas is moving on. And Ty just told me that, so there is a spot that will be, Tom's spot will be replaced by a Division I men's coach. And we've got Billy Riga up here. We've got Wayne Dean. Doug Schuler's not here. All right, so here's how I'd like to do this. First, I was asked to explain what can or can't happen in the middle of a 2-year book, and then there are specific topics they want some input on. What can not happen is the writing of new rules that are not we have not previously taken up in our meetings last year. We will have new points of emphasis. There is some freedom to tweak mechanics and those things like the standard that are not specifically written rules in the book. I think I can allay your fears so we don't get into another overtime discussion that certainly what I kind of implied yesterday, and I can't say it 100% fact, but it seems that there's enough of two discussions going on that, in my opinion, the 4-on-4 that was tabled will not likely come back as a mandated rule. It's actually still in the book, and I'm told there's some Division III Division III interest in their using 4-on-4, which they can do. But what we heard yesterday and what we're hearing in casual conversation is that as many as half the Division I conferences may be using 5-on-5, 3-on-3 in some form, either as experimental rules in the league games or in exhibition games, that the movement of this discussion seems to be that the committee would be less likely to kind of mandate 4-on-4 in light of the opposition and in the likelihood that there'll be a different discussion at the end of this next year. So that we started to hear yesterday some people who have already used 5-on-5, 3-on-3 and like it, and they're going to get another year at it. And then at that point, it either has to become in the rule book or the experimental part of it cannot be continued after this book. So I can't say with 100% certainty, but if I was a betting man, the 4-on-4 is not going to get resurrected and mandated for 1 year. So if that gets people off the ledge, I'd rather move on to other topics. So video replay has been, if you were a fly on the wall at these rules meetings, increasingly the amount of time spent on replay related. Can we get those doors closed, please? We're not competing with the crowds. Thank you. The amount of time the committee spends on replay-related topics is increasing with each meeting. And, you know, for the Division III people who might be in the room, they good-naturedly sit through these discussions knowing that in most cases it has nothing to do with them. But you end up with a debate, and I'd like to hear some of you guys on this, between we're spending all this money to have it, let's get it right, versus the way it creeps into long delays, long reviews, getting closer and closer to calling penalties by video. We've kind of stopped short of actually calling penalties, but we're getting into we have a penalty, we want to see if it's a 5 or a 2, and most people think, hey, if you got it and we can get the right call and we don't throw somebody out of a game, that's good. But I know yesterday somebody raised the issue of that kind of grayer area where something that wasn't detected, and then you look at it and you may come out with a major. So I think the committee would be interested in knowing what your thoughts are on the use of video. The page, or now maybe 2 pages, that cover the situations grows each year. We can't add situations, but I think the committee does have the right to revisit the postseason review of undetected calls, because I think we heard yesterday, and if you guys could take notes here on things that are said from the floor. Gotcha. Who was it yesterday that really wanted to call the attention to the Rules Committee about these undetected? In fact, was Josh here? I know you had raised it at one time. Is that something you think you'd like to reconsider, the committee to reconsider?
Donnie, why don't you speak on it? You spoke about it yesterday.
He had the pros and cons, so we not at a meeting that Friday morning. That all the other coaches that I talked to and discussed it here felt that 4 guys are on the ice and they determined they're not going to call a penalty on the play. We don't think they should then go to
So you're really saying that the two situations are okay if they're using it properly, but if it's a play that they did see and chose not to call, that's not an undetected play. They saw it, they just chose not to call, and they're not really supposed to go back and get a second look at it.
Agreed. And I informed Ty of my opinion on that, and he said to me, there's gray area in what's undetectable. Yes, I saw the hit, but maybe I didn't see him get him in the head. And I think our conference, obviously the Big Ten, put your arm up, lay on it.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on this? And one of the, just as a little footnote here, I would use this time. There's time between this meeting and the June meeting in Indianapolis. In that time period, there'll probably be surveys. There usually are surveys to get your opinions on things. But everybody also has the opportunity in between where maybe you didn't think of it while you're sitting here, but you're on the plane on the way home or you have conversations before you leave. If you have a specific thought that you want the committee to explore, and again, mindful of what we can put in a book or a memo in a mid-book year, we would encourage you to do that so that whether it's directly to Ty or to the people in the office or to people you know that are on the committee, there's really no thought that's not worth us adding to the list of what we're going to consider. The other replay-related subject is offsides. And the origin of looking at this goes back a number of years ago where there was some, I guess they used the word egregious, a play where somebody was 3 feet offsides and went in alone and didn't score, and somebody says, we got to have that in the book. I mean, that was so obvious offside. So when it was first written, it said, I think it used that language, an egregious offside that leads directly to a goal in a game that is televised. That was the original rule. And the last part was because if the game is televised, you're going to have ample cameras and you're going to be able to see it. And then it took a very short time for that to be, wait a minute, offsides is offsides. And if a puck enters the zone illegally, anything that follows should be illegal. And so you jumped from that rather tight definition to where we are now, where in the postseason every goal gets reviewed, which means you have to go back to see how every puck entered the zone. And the offsides no longer have to be, quote, egregious. If you can go frame by frame and the back foot comes up above the blue line, so he's offsides, and then that's as good as if he's 3 feet offsides. So there have been some people asking questions about the delays caused. We got to a situation last year where, at least in the regular season, you have to use a challenge, a coach's challenge to challenge offsides. We do have at the rules meetings a referee and a linesman who sit in on they don't get to vote, but they sit in on the meetings. And when we discuss these things, you turn to them and say, what do you think about this? And one of the linesmen said, sometimes I think I might have missed it and I go to the ref, but you're saying we can't initiate the review, only the coach's challenge. So we put in last 2 minutes of the game, the ref can do it, and looking back on it, that's pretty arbitrary. It could have been a key play, 4 minutes left in the game or 5 minutes left. But the referees can't initiate that review until the very end of the game. Now, we can't change that, but, a lot of the things we're trying to do is gather things for discussion that may not be acted upon this year, but preparing ourselves for the following year when we identify the things that there's a groundswell from the membership that should be looked at. Most of the people I talk to say we want to get it right. Offsides are important. You got the technology, do it. Is there any other opinion in the room about its effects on slowing games down or something else could be done? Casey?
We want to just, it needs a challenge. It's required a challenge, and, if you think they didn't get it right, then you use your challenge, and you're right to keep your challenge. But we want to take the stoppage out of the game. We want to go straight to coach's discretion on a challenge.
Anybody else on that?
Which, Joe, that is the current rule.
Yes.
Except for the postseason.
Postseason, everything's reviewed. So do you feel that should still be the case because of what's at stake in the postseason?
We want challenges.
Even in the postseason?
Yeah, I think that's what we voted on in the ECAC. We're unanimous.
I raised the topic the other day and had internally about giving coaches a second timeout or somehow having a lot of times you use your timeout after an icing, you're resting players or late in the game strategy, and you now have to weigh when you use that versus whether you're going to need it for a challenge. I haven't seen a lot of support for it, and some people say, well, you know what, Joe, your idea of a challenge timeout and a rest timeout, they'll just use them both when they need them, and they'll abuse the system whether they really want to challenge something or not. Somebody else will give them one timeout in the first 2 periods and one in the third period, and they can choose to use it however they want to do it. We can't do that in this book, but I think a lot of people get forced into a situation where they've got to decide whether they really need it to rest their guys, and then they know they can't challenge anything else later on, and they would prefer not to be in that situation. But that's something down the line we could consider. Standard of play. So we had a lot of talk in our league about looking at penalties that are called league by league and patterns early in the year. We have an advisory group at the Division I level that gets on calls once a month, and there seemed to be a couple of observations. One, that as everybody expected, early in the year there were a lot of penalties called. Then it got to phase 2, where it settled down, and there's probably open discussion whether that was a result of referees adjusting or players adjusting or both. And then you got to phase 3, which might have been February, where penalties were way down. And now the suggestion is people just got back. They went away from the new standard. It just was business as usual. And I know in one set of stats I saw for the final 2 weekends, which were playoff weekends, it was like nothing had ever been implemented at all. So standard of play is not a rule, but it's a point of emphasis. And so what the committee is going to have to take up is, where do we pick this up at the start of next year? How do we, prevent the different phases? How much of that is human nature? How much of that is directives from supervisors to their officials, and how much they embrace that and how much they maybe don't necessarily think that's the way we should be doing. But we would be curious in hearing on how you felt that went in its implementation and its consistency. And the fact that you play non-league games that affect your RPI, you should have an interest in how other leagues are doing it as well as your own. Any comments?
The numbers are similar for all the leagues in the way it went from 8 penalties a game to 2 by the end. So it's not just league by, like, all the leagues were similar in the way it broke down.
Well, I think what I'm saying is everybody has the responsibility to give attention as it's defined by the committee. So first of all, you have to understand what changed. And, you do have people still talking about NHL, parallel stick. We weren't the NHL. We had our own definitions. But even in the middle of the year, I would hear somebody talk about, well, the guy, he still got his shot off. So he really didn't get hooked. Well, he didn't get it. He didn't get the same kind of shot off that he would have if the guy didn't pull his elbow back right as he was releasing it. We tried to be very specific with language to define what it is we were doing and what we weren't doing. And so you go through these steps, and it did get from one point to another point, and I think to a third point. And how much of that is things we can influence, and you can constantly remind people, but there's also a feeling that different leagues were more enthusiastic about embracing this than others. And we are connected at the hip a little bit in the number of games, in some leagues more than others because they have higher amount of non-league games. But we have to go back as a committee and say, how did that work? What didn't work? How do we communicate what we're trying to do? Do we have to use more video? Do we have to be more? We tend to, I think, once the season starts, and I shouldn't say it because I'm not a big arbiter guy, but I think we do tend to rely on the supervisors at every level to be the teacher. It starts at the top, it gets the tools to the supervisors, and we really need them to spread the message. and how, some do a better job than others, some do it more regularly, but that's where we can only be the kind of we set the table, we set the tone, provide the materials, and then it's really done more at a local level. Oh, Bobby. I recall last June that we spent the most time on was this idea of a big hit, where half the room said, you got to call something, and the other half said, but what? What did he do? And I remember the play. It was Will Butcher in an outdoor game, came around the net and hit a guy at center ice, and the guy received it, and the defender stepped up, and it was a big hit. But then we looked at it again. Was it a charge? No. Was it an elbow? No. Was it a high stick? No. Did it make contact with the head? No. Was it interference? No, he had the puck. So what's the penalty? Oh, we got to take that play out of the game. It's a dangerous play. All right, but what's the penalty? What do you tell the defender? Well, the guy was in a vulnerable position. What's that have to do with the defender? Who put himself in the vulnerable position? He went across center ice with his head down, got a pass, and he got hit hard. So, and a couple of times this year I've been at games where I hit 5 minutes for interference. So 5-minute interference? So yeah, you can't. We got to take those hits out of the game. And the room was split almost right down the middle. That somebody's going to get hurt with a play like that. And the other side said, well, what did the defender do wrong besides hit him hard? So those types of hits, when you challenge them, a guy may just say the same thing. I was instructed. But there was no hit. There was no, yeah. And then you see this. So that basically would take the postseason policy we have now in effect. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but put it in the regular season where you can use video. Anytime a player is going to be ejected from the game, you're going to be able to have a challenge to make sure if he should have got a 2, he gets the 2 and not the 5. Because you would have that opportunity. The referees at least would have the opportunity in the postseason to check that play a second time, but they can't in the regular season. You think it should be extended to the regular season by way of a challenge? Put that. Yep. Yes. Yep. Got it.
Got it.
Why is it so difficult? The standard of play is so different.
Because you got humans enforcing the policy, I guess. You know.
You think from a director's level, the different leagues, they're all on the same page, they're showing the same video. So an Eastern team comes west, or Western team goes east. They know going in. It's not going to be a change versus, well, what's the reputation? You call more to the east, less to the west.
I think it comes down to how enthusiastically a supervisor will impress upon his crew what they have to do and how. Because we come out of the meetings with a pretty well-defined, I think, definitions of what we're trying to change. And then we're at the mercy of getting it out to the people who have to translate. It's a pyramid. So the committee does this, and you get X number of supervisors, and they've got X number of officials. And then within that, you've got observers or some sort of system where people are supposed to watch the officials, talk to the coaches, and find out if they're meeting their responsibility in properly teaching it and enforcing it. And there's a lot of humans in the middle of that, you know. And a lot of people have a spectrum on what they have. You could probably take the officials in your league and put them on a spectrum. Who's most likely to overcall something and who's most likely to let things go. And over the years, I know in our league, the guys that are inclined to let things go, we try to weed them out a little bit, because we're trying to get people to know not to stop handicapping a game. Know what a penalty is when you see it, call it. Don't factor in what the score is, or how many you called on that team, or how late it is. But these are humans making calls.
Donnie, I see that all the time. Being on the committee, been talking to an official in our locker room, and he's telling me how it should be. And the story from the committee to the officials often is a long trail. And I sit there and say, man, that's not how it came from the committee. It changed from person to person to person. Now it's totally different. I see it all the time. It's frustrating. I don't know how to fix it, but I agree with you.
I don't think this is on Ty's list, but I got into a spirited conversation with the advisory committee yesterday with Teddy Donato here about goalie contact, goalie interference. And I really don't like to be stereotyped as the goalie guy, but in this instance, I was defending the goalie. So the play was in the Bruins-Ottawa series in overtime when Achari, the kid from Providence, went in and they seemed to score a goal, but there was contact with the goalie's leg, and the announcers were, what was the forward supposed to do? And as the goalie guy, I'm saying, well, he's supposed to not make contact with the goalie. And I think, Teddy, your point was, Teddy could make the case that the goalie actually tripped him as he got close. And then we get into, well, how come goalies are allowed to come out and throw their stick and trip the attacking player, but if a defenseman does the same thing, it's a penalty. So that's the other area we've spent so much time in the last few years on goaltender interference, and I think it probably is an area that the committee can look at on an annual basis and tweak the standard that they call, because the rule's in there. And I also think the committee felt in recent years it's given the attacking player, it's acknowledged more rights to the attacking player than they had in the past. So that provided it's not in the crease, preventing the goalie from playing, contact that's outside the crease is going to be handled differently. And again, for the Division III guys out here, you don't get that second look with the replay that the Division I guys get to see. But it's such a huge part of a game where goal scoring is tough, and you work so hard and you get a goal and it comes back and it's taken off the board because of the interpretation of interference. You can feel the air just leave the whole building. People are so depressed by this goal taken off, and they don't want to know why. So we as a committee have the opportunity to continue to address that, but I guess we'd want to hear what your experiences were this year, if there's any trend in how you see it being called that's inconsistent with what's in the book, inconsistent with what you thought the standards were there, or is it getting better? Are you starting better to be able to realize how a review is going to come out because you know what they're supposed to be looking at? What's the lay of the land on the whole goalie interference area? So it's perfect? Everything's fine? Or let the record show there were no comments on goalie interference.
Perfect. Everything's fine.
Goalie equipment. So we were told one of the things we have, Mike Murphy from the NHL attends our meetings. He doesn't vote, but he shares what the NHL's thinking about, what they're doing. It's before Mike, it was E.J. McGuire. It's been a great addition to the Rules Committee because they come in and they don't look down their nose at us. They don't act like they know better than we. They acknowledge sometimes they've taken rules from us that we did first, and then they'll tip us off on things that could affect us. And I got to write things down as I think of them because I'm going to forget them. So the last one was about changing the size of the upper body equipment. So over the year, the last time we did this, we shrunk the pads by an inch, leg pads by an inch. We shrunk the gloves in certain areas by an inch. But as we all know, the way the goalies are playing, they can play deeper and fill the net because the upper body stuff is just many inches off their body, and it's no longer just for protection, but for blocking. And so we were under the impression they were going to have things already in place for this past season, and it didn't happen. But they do tell us they are moving in that direction. There's going to be a significant cut in the what's allowed in the upper body. And what we've done in the past is we've adopted what the NHL has done with about a 2-year window for compliance. And a lot of that is the lobbying of the manufacturers who want to have inventory they've got to move, and that it's just it wouldn't be acceptable for us to change it at the same time they do it. So you should pay attention to what the NHL does and then anticipate our committee would take it up. But when I mentioned this to somebody recently, they said, well, whose job is it to check this stuff anyway? And even now, whose job is it? I mean, if we think a guy's pads are an inch bigger or he's got some, it's not the referee's job apparently, whose is it? And it really does go back in the regular season to the conferences, that the conferences are encouraged to have some sort of system, whether it's to send people at the start of the year or spot checks during the year, but it's not a challenge like a stick challenge or things that can happen on the spot. Has anybody, this is more anecdotal, has anybody had a sense in any games that you think an opposing goaltender's equipment is illegal, or have you ever brought it to your commissioner, or you wondered about it yourself? But I had not heard much in the last couple of years, but I had 2 conversations this year where people thought that they clearly felt that somebody's equipment was illegal, and they were surprised nobody was checking it. Anybody? Okay. Another topic that came up at our meeting last year was, this goes back to an old Jack Parker conversation down here, what Jack used to see, that in football games occasionally officials get together and then you see the guy get in the mic, turn the mic on and say there was no foul on the play, no penalty on the play, and pick up the flag. And he always wondered why ice hockey officials couldn't do that. That if an official made a call that the other 3 knew were pretty sure he might have gotten it wrong, why they couldn't get together. And Mike and Murph says in the NHL they actually can do that, but they they discourage it, or they don't like to see it happen a lot. But under their rules, that can happen. Is that something that the committee should discuss and discuss with the supervisors? I mean, we do have supervisors in the room, and given the silence in this session, if you want to speak up, you'd be more than welcome. Do you think there's any merit in having a culture change that would allow that to happen under the guise of let's get it right? Bill?
I'd say at D3 level for sure, because we don't have video replay to go back and look at any of that stuff. And if 3 people say no and one person thought it was, that's our only avenue of
Getting it right.
getting it right.
Shep or Gino or any of you guys in the back, any thoughts on this?
We talk about it, right? It's one of the few sports where we get penalized for talking together. And we put our hand up, going back to what the coach over there was saying was, we got his arm up. We don't have the ability to pick up a flag at all. If we had that ability, I think there'd be a lot less friction with everybody. Hey, I made a call. Then I go to the other guy. What was your angle on it? And let's talk about a fix. But when we do that, if the other side of the room is pissed off because now we might be negating a foul play. You really want to get it right, give us some tools so we can do that from a mechanic standpoint and get people to interact. I think it's a great idea, but we get chastised the minute we're making a call a split second. I might have a bad angle on it. We were just talking about that outdoor game, right? You get a bad angle on the hit, and we don't get a chance to take our arm down and not call the penalty. Something has to happen, like the hit to the head, right? You have to come up with a minor penalty if you come up with something. That doesn't help us. What helps us is hey, the guy tripped over his own stick. We're going to take the thing down and let the video prove us right.
Well, that's the other part, because you want to get it right too, because the whole people watching on TV are going to know if you got it wrong.
But we're the only one of the few sports that you can't pick the flag on this. That's going to help us. And I'd be all in favor for that if we could get people to buy in that we want to communicate on the ice and try and get it right, just like anybody else. As like you said, we get the hand up, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's done. And I think that's the one thing we should be really looking at. What can we do in those situations to correct
Frank?
So I talked to Frank and Pi and Gino and I have talked about it as well. Like embellishment, like I don't think we're going to be able to get embellishment out of the game totally unless all four officials are working on it together. Because like I'm at certain angles sometimes I see that referee that makes that call, he sees what he sees, but there's other angles, and then you can see it was that there was a embellishment Academy Award or whatever. And I really think that it's important that those guys, if you want to get it out, like the guys that are good at it are good at it. And when there's a referee, he's actually the victim. He gets caught. And if they could get together and the other three guys go, hey, we know what you saw. What you saw was not was an illusion because there wasn't even contact or embellishment. Embellished it, and then and then you expose that player. And I don't know what the penalties are after that, but I don't know how you can get some of these things right. Like we talked to our team, we got a home team and away team, and that referee should be a team. We got four guys out there. It should be four individuals. It should be a team of four. And the other thing that Don was talking about with in terms of cutting down the replay, if those four guys get together on things and they all are unanimous, what the hell do you have to go upstairs for? If you're willing to take the chance. Same thing with what Bob's talking about on the big hit. The referees are what they see, that they're afraid of screwing up, not making a call on a violent hit. So they're making a safety call. If they were able to get together and then even take it a step farther, if they have to use the video. But I don't, we talked to our defensemen as playing as a pair, not as two individuals. And to me, the same thing with the officials. That should be a team. That should be a group of four, not four individuals.
Historically, you used to hear that one referee doesn't want to make his guy look bad, so he's not gonna challenge. I'm hoping that's not the current culture.
We go about this all the time. We've actually trying to get stuff into the mechanics. We talked yesterday afternoon about mechanics. I think it's a great thing for us to be able to go to the lines because the way the thing's written up, he can't interject himself on a minor penalty, but he can surely assist us. We just don't want to get into the situation where he's giving us valuable information and then taking the heat on because we're getting the valuable information. It's a buy-in. Buy-in in what we're doing on the ice and trying to get it right. And like I said, let the video prove us right, not prove us wrong. We got the four people. It's just a matter of it's a buy-in. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think
Somebody in the back, Keith. All right, they can't use the video to change the call. Yeah.
ultimately, the coaches, we just want you to get it right. And one thing, like sometimes the guy that makes the call is the victim because he's at a bad angle. And we got 7 cameras in our building. Like we're gonna find it if it's there. We just got to give them the best opportunity we can to make the right call. I think.
Good. Two things here. I know we've got lunch and exhibitors and a Division I issues follow-up meeting, so I don't want to get into too much of that time. Embellishment and diving is a separate topic here. How many of your conferences have a policy to deal with embellishment and diving beyond what the referees can do, like a discipline structure? I know we have a situation in our league that if we think there's a repeat offender and we send video to the coach, it's like a 3 strikes and you're out. But has anybody taken their attempt as a group to deal with diving to the league level outside of what the referees do? Has it risen to that level in other leagues? No? Okay. Here's what I'd like to do, because I'm in the line of fire too often. I would like either Wayne or Billy, if there are any just general comments. I mean, Bill, you're coming on the committee, correct? But any from the conversations you've had, from your own thoughts on rules, what are the types of things you think we're going to be focusing on this June, as you understand it?
I think with the overtime looking like it's going in a certain direction for this year, the feeling on the committee is to move towards the next rules in another year, getting that uniform overtime across all leagues and levels. And I guess we haven't really put it out there to the group, but is there a strong feeling within the group and the membership that you all want that? Like we all think that's a good thing to get the overtime uniform across all leagues? Or are there any discussion about that?
Yesterday in our D3 meeting, that was one of the topics that we talked about, is to have one uniform policy. It was a unanimous vote of everybody there, that the overtime policy would be unanimous in the national rule. Then we took separate votes to see whether it would be 5-on-5, 4-on-4, 3-on-3, whatever the case may be. But it was definitely unanimous that it should be a national policy. It might have been one dissenting vote, I can't remember, but it was very, very much supported that it be a national policy.
Okay.
Did you have a different policy for Division I hockey versus Division III, or policy for men's hockey versus women's hockey?
Ty says that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's more likely to get it for men's and women's than it is by division.
And the only other way that's done is if you have different options, then this division or this gender can choose the option they like. But I think Billy was responding to the larger picture. Could the rule book and the committees be separated? And his answer, I think, was it was more likely you could pursue a separation of women's hockey rule book, rules committee, than you could division to division.
No, my question was, for overtime, do you have a separate rule, men's overtime versus women's overtime?
Within the book.
Or not?
I don't know.
We'll find that out.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Well, right now they have different high sticking rules than we do, so why couldn't they have different rules?
What different
They
heights?
can play the puck high.
No, they can't. They proposed it, but they can't.
Oh, it didn't pass.
We didn't want to encourage sticks up to that high. Right. So that's the one example. And that's the one rule that, for many of us, make it a different game. You know, the people say, well, there's only one page, it's different, but that one page changes the whole nature of the game.
And that's why Ty said it's more likely to get it by gender, because you can claim it's a different sport.
Wayne?
I guess the only thing that I would say is how important it is for our committee to know how people stand. So I would encourage people to go to their conferences, their commissioners, get your opinions on the table. I know we went through the comment period after the vote last year, and that was very effective. A lot of people commented. We wish more would have commented, because when we get in the summer, people get away, and it's really hard to get a comprehensive feedback from people. But I think it's really important. Go to your commissioners and get the word to us. I know sometimes people say, well, we tell you what we want and you do the opposite anyway. I don't think that's true, and we certainly don't want to do that. But if we don't know where you stand, it's pretty hard to sit in a room and figure it out. So that would be my comment from my side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so not holding you to this, but you believe regarding overtime for this year, it'll be brought back up because what was tabled was 4-on-4.
Right.
And then ultimately that probably isn't going anywhere.
That would be my guess.
But then the committee will take the next year with conferences doing some different formats, some of those being very similar, gathering information, data, and then in the next rule change year, a year from now, this could come back up with some different.
Yeah, I think with the collision course we're heading on is at the end of this year, we're going to have a number of people that will have tried one system and may come to like it, and another group that steadfastly likes to stay 5-on-5. And so you're going to have this overriding feeling we should have one system, and you're going to have two blocks of people thinking their system is the one it should be. So somehow that'll be the challenge, my guess, a year from now. If you know, first vote, we want one system, it's near unanimous. Second vote, which system do you want? And it's Republicans and Democrats, you know. So in closing here, guys, I know there was silence, as there often is, because you get other things in your mind, and you know nothing immediate's going to happen right now. But I've said this many times, whether it's the rules, whether it's how the convention went, whatever, in this next few days, you get in the plane, you get a lot of time to yourself, and when you get home, it's a different world. It's the sun's out, and, well, maybe not in some places, but it's warm weather. You're not thinking about this stuff. Now is the time to to think about something you heard, a conversation you were part of, something that bothers you, an idea you want, and get it. If it's rules, get it to us or to Ty, whoever, because we will have those meetings. If it's a tournament, Kristen's still here. You have the opportunity to be heard. Also, and back to the rules thing, you have the opportunities to raise your hand and try to get on these committees sometimes. And you want to know how this guy, how come there aren't enough coaches? There's an opening, and you have to be nominated by a multi-sport conference and so forth. But if you don't make the effort and raise the hand and be willing to do the work, you kind of lose some of your right to gripe about it later on. So if you want to take Tom's place, those of you that are Division I guys in here, find out how the paperwork's going, get a multi-sport conference to nominate you, then get on the committee, and then you'll have some say in the process. All right, go grab lunch. Oh, wait a minute, Brian's speaking.
Hey, so everybody knows lunch is at the opposite end here of the building. They got a great setup. All right, all the D1 coaches, you can grab your food and come on back in here. We'll re-hit the issues there, NLI.
One thing my athletic director asked me to bring up the rules. She was very upset with the fact that you had to put in
Kids, stop fighting.
2 days in a row. So many schools were given waivers. And why? Because we did it. Did she have to spend $4,000 or $5,000?
Quick hello, how you doing? Good to see you down here. Good to see you. Good to be down here. My wife down earlier.
It was mandated, and then it was mandated over a 2-year process. And then when we got to the 2-year process, there were a ton of schools that said,
how are you?
You know what? We don't own our rink. We don't have any control over it.
Your eyes are getting worse, but thank you.
Our referee in chief said, plain and simple, he's not going to hold up a game if they don't. Yes. Yes. I don't know what she did. She just asked me to mention to the rule committee that it's stupid to make rules up that cannot be enforced. Yeah. The NHL style post, the 10-inch post. Yes. And there's nobody that's got too many people in their building. She was upset with that. I gave so many.
Some people just didn't do it. We got
Correct.
2 teams in the same city.
And she doesn't mind doing it, but then why do we have to do it? Why do we have to do it? They were going to hold 60 in the 5. People that go to both games are going, how can you supposed to do what they do?
It's fucking confusing because they have a game-winning goal every game.
Yes.
That's what Mike Murphy told me. You got a game-winning goal every game. Highlight. I got it.
And our fans are like, it's confusing to our fan base.
Yeah.
When our football team plays University of Colorado or whoever they play, it's a different league.
That's the thing, we own our own rinks.
That's the bitch about experimental rules. When you let people do it.
But we got it. But we also have to be. Coaches have a tendency to be too traditional, and we are in the entertainment business as well. We are in the entertainment business.
Well, yeah. Why make a rule? Why make a rule if you aren't going to follow through with it?
It'll be a good discussion.
And the other thing with the officials, you got to let the officials get together and make a wrong. They have to be. I don't know if I made a good.
It's new, so I'm trying to figure it out.
You have to let them work as a team, not form the
It's a dance. It's a high wire act.
Like if you're going to make an angle, you make a call that's going to make you look bad. I know you're going to get video on it. I'm going to come and say, hey, fuck, I'm just telling you. No, I saw it. I fucking saw. I know the angle you were at. I saw it. Fucking, we don't want to go here because we're going to get video. We're going to get our asses chewed.
Yeah.
Like what? If 3 guys come to you and say you were a victim, you're at a bad angle. Like you have to.
What do you think about? Keith mentioned what happened to us. So they called
That's bullshit.
Yale Slash. They go to video.
It's bullshit.
And it was the kid they called it
It's
on.
bullshit.
And then so they picked the next closest guy, and they said put him in the box. And I said I don't know how you can look that kid in the face. You know he didn't come
It's
in.
bullshit. It's bullshit. That's where you got to be able to pick the fucking flag up.
Yeah, you got to be able to pick him up.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that was very frustrating. All right. Good to talk to you.
good to talk to you too, pal.
they need a home game.
Yes, yes.
And 19, 20, or 21, we'd come. If you want to start, I know you're.
No.
I don't want to keep bugging you.
No, you're not bugging me. It just 17, 18.
Yeah,
17, 18 coming up.
right, 18, 19 is when I have.
So you need.
I just need a home game.
Okay.
But we'd come.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Following year.
Yeah, following year.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it seems like we.
All right. See you. Maybe see you over there.
How are you? Good. How are you?